was first exposed to porn when I was 7. Those 5 or 10 minutes that it takes for the enemy to plant that seed, it has such a huge return for the enemy in your life.
Walker Henderson.
Hi.
Welcome to the Freedom Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
Yeah.
As a little background for everybody that's watching this, I've known your family for 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
Because we grew up doing the same homeschool tutorial. So I saw you one day a week for many years.
Yeah.
And your mom was my 7th grade teacher. But I wanted to bring you here today because the Walker that I remember in high school is very different than the Walker today. And I've seen like clips of what you've been doing in your life and through talking with your mom and stuff. And now you're a middle school director at a church in Middle Tennessee. So I kind of want to talk about what happened between high school and now and what's changed and where God has brought you. So let's start when would you say you made the decision to become a Christian for yourself and it wasn't just your parents' faith? Yeah,
that's a good question. So I think growing up in Middle Tennessee, in Williamson County, it's a very saturated Christian bubble. And so I grew up, around the things of God, going to church every week. I went to a Baptist church here in the area growing up, and I always knew about God, and that was the context in which I grew up. And, that would be, I guess my relationship with God looked like, praying before meals, praying before I went to bed, memorizing scripture, following God and doing the right thing because that's what God wanted me to do and because it was the right thing to do and because the Bible said so. But I don't think that I understood what a relationship with Jesus looked like, that Jesus wanted to be a part of every single aspect of my life, that he wasn't just this God that was distant and far away and, had his do not disturb on most of the time. And I would pray when I was really, desperate or needed something. But that he's this God that, that really wants to love me and to know everything about me. And he wants me to know him in the same way. So growing up, I didn't really know that. I didn't really learn that at church. I learned all the Bible stories and learned all the things that one does, growing up in church, going to Sunday school. And then once I got into probably later into middle school and especially high school, life got more real. It wasn't just, playing with my friends and having fun, but, school became more difficult. I started to realize things about myself that were challenging. I started to, realize that the world isn't this perfect fairy tale place, and started to deal with, things like depression and anxiety and addiction and things that I didn't know how to cope with. And, I think it was those challenges and those pitfalls that really led me to question my faith and to allow my faith to be challenged and refined. And so throughout high school, I would have called myself a Christian, and I think in some ways I was, and it's hard to define exactly the point where you accepted Jesus and exactly the point where you were quote unquote saved. And I think that it's more of a process. Yeah. And I don't know who first said this, but I heard this quote one time that we were saved, we are being saved, and we will be saved. That it's a process, it's a journey. It doesn't look
justification, sanctification, and glorification. Yeah. They're all biblical principles, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's a process, and it looks different for so many different people. And so for me, getting into high school and starting to experience these different challenges and pitfalls, those things really drove me into scripture, and drove me deeper into the word, deeper into prayer, and into desperation, because I realized, before that point, before probably 16, 17, 18 years old, Jesus was always my savior, and he was my savior. He was the one that saved me from my sins, that died on the cross for me. But he hadn't yet become my Lord. He hadn't yet become Lord of my life. I hadn't submitted all of my desires and wants and actions and thoughts to Him. And so my life looked very different, like you said, in high school. My life looked a lot different than it does now. So at about 18, right after I graduated high school, I had just come out of a really tough breakup. I had been dating a girl for almost 2 years, and it was my first real relationship. And made a lot of mistakes in that relationship, and it became very unhealthy. But I was very attached to this girl, and had really strong feelings for her. And so when we broke up, that it broke me. And I didn't know how to cope with that or how to move on. And that led me to a really dark place where I kind of just spiraled. And I didn't know, I guess, what was important in life anymore, because she had become the focal point of my life. And then suddenly she was no longer there. And so I felt like I was stripped of everything, and I felt like I had nothing. And I think it was that desperation, as well as just, all the pressure of trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. Because from 16 to 18, that is such a stressful period to try to figure out, okay, what college am I going to go to? What's my major going to be? Let me have my whole life planned out by the time that I'm 18, before my brain, 7 years before my brain is even fully developed. And I think
Right.
that's insane that we expect that out of young people. But I felt so much pressure, and I felt like I couldn't live up to that pressure. I felt like I didn't have what it takes. So yeah, my life felt like it was just, and it sounds kind of dramatic to say this now, looking back after experiencing other things, but it really felt in the moment, all those things felt really huge, and it felt like my life was crumbling in a lot of ways. And so I remember, I was in my first semester of college at Columbia State, shout out C State. And I had no motivation for school. I was the worst procrastinator, and it was halfway through the semester, and I was failing multiple classes. And I just got to a point where I'm like, I can't go to class anymore. I was, depressed and anxious, and honestly just full of despair. I kind of just like lost hope.
Yeah.
And so I stopped going to class. I didn't even officially drop out. Like, I couldn't even muster up the courage to like go in and tell them that I was dropping the classes. So I'm like, I'm just not going to show up anymore, and hopefully everything will be okay. And so I ended up doing that. And then there was one night that semester that I just broke, and I realized, like, I cannot be the master of my life anymore. I cannot be the Lord of my own life. I need to submit my life to Jesus fully. And so I got on my knees, and I was in tears. And, I'd prayed that prayer so many times of God to take my life, and Lord, I submit my life to you. But I think that was the first time that I truly meant it. That was the first time that my heart was really contrite and desperate before the Lord. And I didn't really even know what to pray. I was like, God, I don't even know what I need. I don't even know what to pray right now. But you know what I need, and please help me. It was just a cry of desperation. And nothing crazy happened in that moment. There was no bright light or like figure angel that appeared in my room. But the Lord he just met me with a sense of peace, and he just met me with his love in that moment. And that was the point. From then on, there was a change in my life. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't up and to the right. But there was a change, and I think that was the day. From then on, I really began my journey of pursuing Christ and being in a relationship with him in a real way.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah.
know that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So you said that you had like depression, anxiety, addiction, and sanctification is a process. And so what did it look like for you battling all three of those things the day after that night?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was definitely up and down, but I think the difference was that I knew that my foundation was in Christ, and I started to realize that the pressure was not the pressure was not on me, and that I couldn't do it on my own. I couldn't plan out my life, and I couldn't deal with these issues in my life that felt monumental. They felt like these huge immovable mountains in front of me, and I knew I just had to lean on the Lord. And I think especially in Christianity, I think it could either be in like self-improvement circles or in Christianity where we're focused on a goal, and our goal is Christ, our goal is perfection, that you can really easily fall into a perfectionistic mentality.
Yeah.
Of like, I want to be fully healed. And if I'm talking to my friend about an issue that I'm struggling with, I'm like, how long did it take you to be fully healed of this?
Right.
How long did it take you to fully get past this? And I think I had to realize and to allow myself to take the pressure off, to get God's perspective and just realize, okay, this is not going to happen in my timing. This is going to happen in His timing. And that doesn't mean that I should stop praying for the Lord to deliver me from this thing. And that doesn't mean that I should stop doing the practical things that I can do to look into myself and to discover, okay, how did this thing begin? How did I develop this addiction? And then why have I stayed in it for so long? And then how do I move on? How do I walk out of this? And doing it with grace. I think that was one of the biggest differences of not, and I still struggle with this, but not condemning myself every time that I fail or every time that I fall, but remembering that I stand in His grace, and that He has mercy, that it's His kindness that leads me to repentance.
Yeah.
It's, He is gentle and lowly, and it's a gentle path that He leads us on. And that every time I fail, that doesn't mean that I'm starting over, but He just wants to kindly and gently lead me back onto that path so that I can continue in following Him. So that was something, it's not something that I realized the day after,
Yeah.
but it's something that I've been learning and will continue to learn,
Yeah.
Since that point.
It's interesting you say that, because yesterday when I was praying through, like, God, is there anything you specifically want me to bring up? One of the things I kept feeling in my spirit was forgiveness and forgiveness of self. And I've noticed in a lot of, especially young men, like high school and college, that shame is a really, really big stumbling block.
Yeah.
Whether it's about the future, about an addiction. A lot of times it's about porn. Like, there's just so much shame, and shame is of the enemy, not of God. Conviction is of God. And I was curious, I know you just talked about like having to forgive yourself and not walk in condemnation, but being in a position of authority over middle schoolers, is that something you've noticed a lot in young men? And then what have you found as a way that is helpful from someone that is older and has walked through stuff?
Okay. Yeah. So shame has definitely been a huge factor and a huge driver in my addiction journey. And my addiction has been porn addiction, and that I'll just talk a little bit about that right now, if that's okay.
Yeah, great.
But I was first exposed to porn when I was 7, and
Wow.
yeah,
That's so young.
super young. Just to go into it a little bit, I was homeschooled, and so I was, spent a lot of time at home. I have 2 sisters. One's a couple years older, and then one's a few years younger than me. And I don't know why, but there was one day that I was home alone, and my mom had left, and my sisters weren't there, and I was 7 years old. And so I think my mom had just gone over to a neighbor's house. She was going to be right back. But for me at 7 years old, for some reason, when my mom left, I just got this like curiosity in me, and I'd probably seen something or been, exposed to some sort of like sexualized material before then that kind of sparked that interest and that curiosity. But I remember just having this urge to get on the computer and just start to like look up things. I just wanted to see. I just wanted to, just wanted to see, and I think it was that little seed that the enemy planted in me. And I've just seen through my story and through the story of so many other guys that were, exposed to it at, 9, 10, 11, 12,
Yeah.
at whatever age that, that 5 minutes that you spend getting exposed to whatever it is, whether it's a friend that shows it to you or you find it of your own volition, those 5 or 10 minutes that it takes for the enemy to plant that seed, it has such a huge return for the enemy in your life. It could be years and years and years of struggle. It could be a broken marriage. It could be a broken family. And it's really sad. And so that's how I was first exposed. And I remember that shame message very clearly, even from 7 years old, because I think it was because of the way that my parents reacted when they found out what I'd looked up. I was 7. I didn't know how to clear the search history at that
Right.
point. And so my dad had figured out, I think later that night, what I had been, what I looked up. And I've talked to him about this, and just told him like, hey, I'm not blaming you for the way that I felt, but I have to name this. I have to go back, for my own freedom and uncover like, why has this been such a shameful area in my life? And he kind of came to me, and it was very accusational of like, hey, what were you looking at? And me as a 7-year-old, I was like terrified. I was
Right.
like, I know this is bad, but I don't really know why this is bad. No one's ever talked to me about this before. And so I just remember feeling so much shame in that moment and feeling so dirty in that moment. And then after that point, I think from that point on, my sexuality as a whole had just become a shameful thing that I shouldn't talk to people about because I would get in trouble, and I shouldn't even like explore this because my sexuality must be bad, because my curiosity and my desire to want to see these things led me to getting in trouble and
Right.
feeling all this shame. So I must be bad for feeling this way and having these desires. And I didn't realize that, okay, these desires are desires that God gave me. They are good desires, but those desires can go wrong.
Right.
And the enemy can use those desires and twist them and thwart them into something that they were never intended to be, that will bring you a lot of death. So that's kind of how my addiction process started out. And from a very young age, I've heard it called a survival mechanism, that from a young age, you learn different behaviors that can help you to cope with hard emotions and with things in
Yeah.
life that you don't know how to deal with. When you're young, if you're not taught how to regulate your emotions, that can lead you to developing unhealthy behaviors and addictions
Right.
in order to cope with those emotions. And as some of the listeners may know, or some of them may not know, when you are watching porn, and when you are, is this
No,
is this
go for
good?
it.
Can I
Yeah,
go
go
there?
for it.
Okay. So when you're watching porn and when you're masturbating, the part of your brain that feels pain or that senses anxiety or worry, all of that shuts off.
Right.
It completely shuts off. So if you're a young kid and no one has told you anything about your sexuality or the feelings that you'll start to have or the desires you'll start to have, and that all of that's normal, and kind of, you kind of need a guide to help you
Yeah.
to get through that. And if you don't have that, why would you not go to something that completely wipes away all of your worries, all of your anxiety in that
Right.
moment. Like people wouldn't go to it if it wasn't effective, if it didn't work.
Right.
And so from a super young age, I learned to use that as a survival mechanism to cope with the painful things in my life that I didn't know how to cope with. And then over time, just struggling with that, and then just learning more and more how much it hurts God's heart
Yeah.
and how society views porn, and how the church views porn. I think that just instilled more and more shame in me.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until probably 17, 18 that it was my shame that was continuing to drive me.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, it's just my sexual urges. It's just, society tells us like, oh, it's healthy for a guy to do this,
Right.
which is insane. And that's kind of the belief system that I fell into, that, okay, I need this, and I'm not married. I'm too young to get married right now. And so this is just, I guess, inevitably what will happen until I'm able to get married. And I didn't fully realize the destruction that it was doing to my body and my brain and my spirit
Yeah.
and my future relationships. And so I think those are things that I wish that I knew, and I wish that I had known about shame earlier on, and the effects that it had on me, or it could potentially have on me in the future. And to answer the second part of your question, I've had a few different men in my life that have helped me to walk through those things. One of them is a guy named Judd Granzow, and I met him when I was 16.
Okay.
And he had a ministry, a podcast where he would talk about porn. Like that's
Wow.
all he would talk about, like the statistics on it. And he would lead groups of guys and kind of help guys to walk through those things. So he was someone who really influenced me, and he was somebody who led me in the right direction and was willing to step into my life and to see me in my struggles. And I remember there was one day that I'd had a really hard few months. This was back in high school, and I hadn't seen him in like 6 months, and I called him out of the blue and just told him what was going on. And immediately he was like, hey, like I can meet with you 3 times a week. Just come over to my house. And I think in the moment I was like, oh, that's really nice. That's a really nice gesture. But looking back, I'm like, okay, this guy was married, had 2 kids, had like multiple jobs, was doing a ministry. For him to give up, 3 mornings of his week to spend time with me was so kind and so generous, and so selfless. And I think without relationships like that, and without older men pouring into me, my story could have been much different and much worse.
Yeah. So then, now walking in freedom, it doesn't mean that the temptation completely goes away, but what are kind of your safeguards for when you do feel that temptation start? And then what do you advise other people to do as well?
Yeah. So very loaded question. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I could talk about this for a long time just because of how much time I've had to spend out of necessity researching these things and discovering all of these things. But I would say, I think a lot of people focus on the sin. They focus on the behavior, the unwanted behavior in their life, whether it be pornography, whether it be, drugs or different substances. They focus on that issue. If I could just get this one thing out of my life, then everything would be fine. If I could just stop doing this thing.
Yeah.
And I got to stop doing this thing and nothing else, and everything will be great in my life, and I'll be able to pursue God, and there won't be any hindrances. And that's just not the reality. If someone who is heavily addicted to pornography were to just stop that behavior and they didn't do anything else, after a few months, they would be miserable. Because like I was talking about before, they're using that, it has a purpose in their life. They're using that behavior in order to cope with emotions.
Right.
In order to process the things that they're dealing with. And it's an unhealthy way to do that, and it's a sinful way to do that, but it's still effective to some extent. And so if you merely just stop doing that and you don't replace it with anything else, you will be completely miserable within a few months. So I think my first piece of advice would be to remember that it's not all about that behavior. That behavior is just the check engine light in your car that's telling you that something deeper is going on. And that behavior shows me, okay, there's something deeper inside of me. There are deeper needs within my soul that are not being met, and I need to figure out how to meet those needs in a healthy way. I need to figure out how to go to the Lord when I'm feeling that anxiety, when I'm feeling that boredom, when I'm feeling that ache in my soul for something more, because everyone feels that. Everyone has that. If they're willing to sit in it, if they're willing to stop, to put their phone down, to turn off the TV, to turn down the music in their car and have a moment of silence, everyone feels that ache. Everyone feels that slight emptiness in their heart. And so if I am not willing to feel that and recognize it and know that there's a deeper issue going on, and to do the work to I don't want to say solve, because it's not an equation, but do the work to discover what's going on and learn to be kind to myself and give myself grace in that, then I will never be free.
Yeah.
And going back to shame, I think when people have issues like porn or drugs or something that they are shameful about, that they don't want to talk with people about, the greatest temptation is to think, okay, I'll just deal with this on my own.
Right.
I don't have to tell anyone. I'll deal with it on my own, and after a few months I'll be okay. But the reality is that shame is learned in relationships, and shame has to be healed in relationships. That's the only way to do it. So if I'm not sharing my burdens, and if I'm not sharing this ache in my heart with someone else, then I can't be free of that shame. And consequently, I won't be free of that unwanted behavior. So it's not, I think a lot of people will put way too much attention on the actual sin. They just condemn themselves over and over and over, and they think, man, if I can just love God more than I love my sin, then I'll be free. And I've had people tell me that multiple times, and that's just not the reality, and that puts more condemnation onto people. Because if you tell someone that's deeply struggling with an addiction, then what are they going to think? They're going to think, dang, I love my sin more than I love God. I'm a terrible Christian.
I'm still not good enough. I'm still not doing enough.
Yeah, and I'll never get there. And that just stacks more of a burden on their shoulders, and it makes them not want to share what they're going through with people, because then they think, oh, everyone else around me must have this figured out. I'm the only one.
I'm the only one struggling.
I'm alone in this.
I agree. It's super important to tell people, because otherwise shame just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I would imagine that a lie from the enemy for younger people is like, well, no one else struggles. So you can't tell an adult because they're going to shame you more. Like if your parents have shamed you, then aren't these other people going to shame you? Yeah. But honestly, and I think parents is really, really vulnerable to tell. But with the statistics, if you find really any older person, especially in men, I think the odds are that they probably would have struggled too.
Yes. Yeah, most likely.
Especially because in church culture, I think it's shifting a lot with our generation becoming leaders. But previously, I've never heard that talked about at church. And now, getting to see like my church's youth group, and our youth pastor is really great, and he does talk about everything. I think it's better now, but I would imagine for a kid that's 14, like a 14-year-old boy in church whose leaders never talk about it, it would be really challenging to bring it up. But I would just encourage like the kids to just find one person that they've had maybe one meaningful conversation with that's not even about an addiction. But odds are like most men have struggled with it. Have you found that in your youth group now and in the middle school kids that you talk about that kind of stuff a lot? Like, is that something that you bring into the curriculum kind of?
Yeah, so I'm still very new to my role. I started working at Grace Chapel in January, and I didn't step into the role that I'm in now until I think the end of July or August. So I'm only a few months into actually being in charge of the middle school.
Yeah.
And I think once you step into a new community, you kind of like have to test the lines and kind of see like, okay, what am I allowed to talk about? What am I not allowed to talk about? And what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? Because from the beginning, I've wanted to vocalize these things. And there have been certain points where I have. I think what I've wanted to be careful about is in middle school ministry, you also have to think about parents, and you have to think about the youngest kid in the room, the most innocent kid in the room, when you're speaking to an entire room, that maybe that kid has never heard of the word porn. We have, which sounds crazy in our day and age, like you would think everyone has. But I know there are some kids in the middle school, some sixth graders, that have not been exposed to it, either knowing what it is or viewing it or any of that. And so that's something that I've been praying about and kind of seeking the Lord for discernment in, because I don't want to start talking about something from the stage that maybe some kids haven't dealt with and some kids may not even know about. And then for them to go home to their parents and be like, hey,
what is that?
This is what I learned about today at church. What is this? And then to have backlash. So I guess I'm kind of stuck between, I don't want to operate in a like fear of man mentality that I'm afraid of what these parents will think. And I'm afraid of, losing my position, because I never want to be the leader that portrays perfection.
Right.
Like we were talking about before we got on. I don't want to be a leader that portrays perfection. And I firmly believe that you should never trust a leader that doesn't show you their limp. You should never trust a leader who doesn't tell you that they're imperfect.
Yeah.
Who doesn't, I'm not saying that they display that they're imperfect all the time by acting sinful, but to just be real and honest with the people that they're leading, that, hey guys, I'm human too. I may be the person that's up on stage right now. I may be the person that is leading the room, but I'm also imperfect. I also have struggles. So I think that it's something that I don't think that I'm doing perfectly. It's something that I want to grow in and to really seek the Lord on, okay, God, how can I talk about these issues and make sure that our kids are being discipled in this area that I find very important, without harming more innocent kids in the room that haven't heard about that.
Right.
And also just navigating how to deal with and to love parents well. And, my job is not to lead the kids when the parents aren't around. It's to partner with the parents in leading and discipling their kids and to help them do that. It's the parents that are having the greatest impact on their kids. I'm just there to kind of help them do that and to walk through that with the kids. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but I appreciate that question because it actually makes me think about that more.
I wonder if there's a way too where you can, like, if it's going to be kind of like a kind of subject, you can let the parents know ahead of time. Because I will say from personal experience, because I grew up in Grace Chapel actually, in the middle school class, I had to have been, probably sixth grade, fifth, sixth grade. One of the leaders had mentioned gay marriage, and I had never heard about that, being homeschooled, and I was like, what is that? Like, they didn't even go into it. They just used the words gay marriage. They didn't even explain what it was. And I was like looking at Sophie sitting next to me, and I was like, what the heck is that about? And she was like, I'm not going to be the one to tell you. And I was like, well, somebody has to tell me. So I went home, and my parents, I think looking back, sheltered me too much. And they may disagree on that. We've had plenty of conversations. But I ended up learning about things from the world before them. So I wish they had told me about a lot of things earlier on. And this wasn't even like some big sin, vulnerability, or addiction or anything. But I'd gone home and was like, Mom, what is gay marriage? And she's like gardening, and she goes, what? And I was like, well,
she's like, I don't know.
She was like, And I was like, well, they talked about it in church and I don't know what it is. And she like sat it down and explained, and I was like, what? But I think that it could be good because it pushed my parents to tell me about things that I would have heard from a friend. Like there were plenty of other things I had to learn from friends before my parents. I wish that I had gotten more of a biblical explanation than a friend that went to public school education. So I think that there can be value in, even if you're letting the parents know ahead of time, being like, this is the topic that your kid is going to be in the world. Like they're going to hear about this from their friends. Why don't we get ahead of that? And pushing, especially the homeschool parents that want to shelter their kids from, and it's a good place of wanting to do that and keep them safe. But that's not the world we live in. So it's better to have them prepared.
I agree. And we have a lot of homeschool parents or homeschool kids in our youth group. We have a lot of CC kids in our youth group. I'm guessing your listeners know what CC is.
Probably. I've talked about it a couple of times.
Conversations.
If you're Middle Tennessee, you probably know what it is.
So we have a lot of kids that are a little more sheltered. So I think if I was leading a youth group of all public school kids, I may operate differently, but
because it's safe to say they know a lot.
Yeah, it is something that I'm walking through and I want to open up more. But I have had parents with certain issues come to me and say, hey, I am displeased by the way that you talked about this. This is a conversation that I want to have with my kid as a parent. So with middle school, it's just especially tough. But it's something that I want to continue to figure out because middle school is the age that people are typically exposed and develop that shame. And if you wait till high school, they may be, 2, 3, 4 years into an addiction. It may have developed into an addiction already. They may already be dealing with a mountain of shame at that point. So with high schoolers, it's a lot more easy. Parents are less involved. And so we've actually started a senior guys group in the high school at Grace Chapel where we walk through these issues.
That's cool.
So that's been really cool, and we're kind of piloting it with the senior guy group. And if all goes well and we have the capacity to take that down to middle school, that's something that we want to do. Because we did develop a curriculum for the senior guys surrounding that issue.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I know you said that you've talked to your dad about the way that he handled when you were 7, but at what point did you end up telling them about that you were struggling with porn addiction?
So
I'm assuming they know now. I was just imagining you'd be like, well, I've never told them, so they're going to find out now.
Yeah. So I never really told them.
Really?
They found out. So 7 is when I was exposed, and then at 10 or 11, I got an iPod Touch. It was like my first device, and I was a 11-year-old with an iPod Touch with access to unrestricted access to the internet, which is an awesome idea. And this is something I'm talking to my parents about now, and I don't blame them. They did not. They didn't know. They weren't educated on how they should be dealing with those things. It was very new for those devices to be out. But right before that, a few years before that, it was flip phones. So it was a very new thing.
The music thing, the iPod Nano or whatever.
So we've come a long way since then. But it was more so throughout the years me getting caught, because my parents they did they would take my phone from me at night and not let me have it in my room. So they were definitely trying, and they were doing their best. And so there were times where they would, after that, see my search history or different things that came up where they knew that I was struggling with it. And then I think at around 18 is when I started to be more vocal. So they already knew it was a struggle for me, but at 18, I started to be, I was starting to be relinquished of some of that shame, and I was able to talk about it more freely with them, which was never a comfortable thing for me to do, to talk to my parents about porn. And I hope that one day I can make that conversation easier for my kids in the future, and that's my goal. But was never an easy conversation with my parents. So now it's something that I can talk with them more freely about and I feel more comfortable with, but that definitely was not always the case. So, if there's anyone listening that's in middle school or high school, that's struggling with anything like that, I would encourage you to talk to your parents, because it can really, your parents love you a lot more than you realize. Our parents love us a lot more than we know. And their desires to help us and their desires to support us, and they don't want us going through these things. So their reactions may not be exactly what we expect or want, but they do desire to help us with these struggles. They're not against us, even though in high school it really feels like your parents are your enemy. But they do love you, they care about you, and I would encourage you, if you have a good relationship with your parents, to share these things with them. And I really believe that you won't regret it. And you can start with, like Isabella said, you can start with, finding a safe person, maybe at your youth group or your school, or a leader in your life. Find that person that really cares for you, that you can share this with. And like she said, I guarantee they have either struggled with that, or they know about it, and they are not going to condemn you or shame you. And if you do share that with someone and they do condemn you or they do shame you, that's not a safe person, and you don't need to share anything with them anymore.
The other thing too is, I think, especially growing up, I had this view of my parents that like they are on this earth to serve me. Like they're not their own people. They're just my parents.
Yeah.
And then you get to like college and you're like, wow, they're like real people. That's crazy. Like they're doing this for the first time.
Yeah.
And that really gave me so much empathy for my parents, is like they're doing all of this for the first time, especially as in like an oldest kid. I'm like, they don't know anything.
Yeah.
So if you go to your parents and you present this issue that you've been struggling with for years, it is brand new for them. And so you have to give them grace to maybe react badly, but it's only because they care about you and don't want bad things to happen to you. But like they're real people with real emotions. And maybe if you haven't been taught how to emotionally regulate from them, it's because they're not great at emotionally regulating. So you have to have grace and patience with your parents too. That was one thing I wanted to talk to you about is I think that a lot of people have not learned how to emotionally regulate as children. Like that has been something that has come up with pretty much every one of my friends. And the Christianese thing is, we'll just take it to God. Like just emotionally regulate with God.
Just lay it at the feet of Jesus.
Lay it, pick up your cross,
all
bow
the
before him,
cliches.
all the things. But it's practically, what does it look like when you're in an anxious spiral to lay it at the feet of Jesus and to learn how to emotionally regulate, especially as an adult. How do you do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Definitely still learning that one. And I don't think there's any like textbook way to do it. It's different for every person. Everyone's different. Everyone has a different context in which they grew up and were developed. And so for me, I think when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I'm feeling anxious, stressed out, a lot of times my instinct or my urge is to still go to porn, of like having that desire, because it's quick and it's easy. But I've been retraining and relearning how to do that, and so it's definitely been a process. So for me, some ways that I do that is playing guitar. I enjoy playing guitar, and it's something that it really soothes me. And I'll just, it doesn't have to be worship songs. I think sometimes we can get stuck in this thing of like, oh, if I'm feeling this way, I have to play a worship song, and then that's gonna I'll connect with God, and then I'll feel better. I'm not saying like you need to like go play like a explicit rap song. Like I don't think that's going to be beneficial to your soul. But playing soothing music on the guitar, that's been one thing that I've found that helps me to regulate my emotions. And when I'm done playing, I'm just like I can take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Another thing would be reading. So that could be reading scripture. I think reading scripture in those moments is really beneficial. So one, from a standpoint of peace, to just be able to read and know specific scriptures that will speak to you in those moments of anxiety, or those moments of pain, or those moments of discouragement. If you're feeling like spiritual warfare and you're feeling like you are being attacked by the enemy, picking up your Bible, opening up Psalm, 91 and reading through that. And I'm hidden under the Lord's wings and his shadow. And he protects me, and he is my refuge, and he is my strength. And also another point on that is like, if every single time I'm tempted by the enemy to look at porn or to do something that does not honor God, if every time that I'm tempted, I open up my Bible and that just becomes my habit, like, I think the enemy is smart enough, and he's going to probably stop tempting me in that way.
Right, because he's like, well, if I do this, he opens the Bible, so that's not going to work anymore.
Yeah, he's got to figure out a different tactic. So, or just reading, different novels, different books.
Right.
I really enjoy reading, so that can be something that's soothing for me. Taking a shower, just like taking a long, warm shower, going on a run, going to work out, calling a friend. If you're overwhelmed and you're dealing with something that feels really big in the moment and really big emotions, sometimes you have those moments that you're like, I will feel this way forever. These emotions are so big, they're never gonna leave, and you can just start to spiral out.
Yeah.
And if you just call somebody on the phone and like, hey, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm dealing with, typically it doesn't feel as big anymore when someone else bears that burden with you. So those are different practices that I have been practicing. I haven't perfected them, but I've been practicing in order to help me to regulate my emotions and discover healthy ways to have my needs met and my needs fulfilled.
Yeah, that's really good. My thing has been sadness. Like, I've never really learned what to do when you're sad, because in my brain, like, it's very practical in my brain where it's like, okay, if I'm angry, then I'm going to go work out. Like, I can use that.
Yeah.
But if I'm
go
sad,
to the body shop.
literally, yes, or go for a run or do something productive. But if I'm sad, I feel like I can't do anything. So I'm like, well, don't like that. So historically, my answer has been, well, then I'll just not feel anything, because I can just shut it off.
Yeah.
But that has proven to not be good, because then when you turn it back on, it's like really overwhelming. And for me, the biggest thing has been, people are like, well, just tell God what you're sad about. And I'm like, that sounds dumb. Like, how's that going to fix anything? I'm just supposed to talk about it? That's crazy.
God, I'm sad.
But actually, it does help. And like reading Psalms, like, love David. He was depressed 75% of the time. Like, he's just like, God,
his emotions were just all over the place.
He's like, God, my enemies are surrounding me and I want to die. I hate my life. There was that one, I think it was Elisha or Elijah, who did the whole like, God, I want to kill myself.
Our Bible expert back there. We're
Christian
waiting,
in the
we're
background.
waiting for the answer.
I was like, do you know this?
I don't remember what's going on.
I think it's Elisha. And he's like, God, I want to kill myself. Just kill me now, end it. And God goes, okay, how about you take a nap and eat a snack? Actually. He's like, all right, I'll do that. And then it's like, skips forward a little bit. And he's like, God, I'm actually fine. I think I'm okay. And like, David is just so funny to me, because there's this one part where he goes, God, I am a worm in your sight. And I think about that all the time, where everything just feels so big, and it's like, God, you're so big and I'm just a worm. And like, I don't know how to be anything but a worm. I'm just a sad worm. But
emo worm.
Just an emo worm. But the moments that I've had where I've been just so like grieved in my spirit are like the car rides I take where I just talk out loud to God. And I think that I had this view, because I can use anger and get rid of it so fast, that if it just takes one conversation of telling God what I'm sad about and it'll be fine. And that's just not the reality. Like, sadness is this whole different ball game. Like, it's a very different emotion. And it's a process. Like, it takes a while. And I think there are some things that I'll just always be sad about. Like, that will just always grieve me, and that's okay, because there are things that also grieve God's heart. And like, the prayer should be like, break my heart for what breaks yours. Like, if I'm never feeling anything, then I can never feel what hurts God's heart. And then I'm just a worse Christian.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I'm a worse child if I can't be grieved by the things he's grieved by and joyful for the things that he's joyful for. Yeah, that's like really hard to learn, especially as an adult.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because things are so much bigger. Like, it would have been so much easier to emotionally regulate everything in my 17-year-old life, where it's like relationships and friends and I don't want to go to school. That's way easier
My
than
homework.
big things. I have my freaking Latin homework. Like,
Latin, yes.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's been
and
a
it's
journey.
like, it makes sense because when you're growing up and you're a kid, if you're ever sad, people are like, "Oh no, what's wrong? Like, don't be sad. Like, let's go do this to be happy. Here's some candy to be happy. Come watch this TV show." And I won't even get into this except a little bit, but parents now that just pacify their kids with iPads 24/7, it's
horrible.
Yeah, it is horrible. It's so terrible for their development. And I'm not pretending to be some parental expert. I'm definitely not.
These kids these days are awful.
These kids these days.
Every time I walk on the sidewalk, no kid moves.
Yeah.
Like, have you noticed that? It'll be in like the grocery store and the kids don't recognize their surroundings.
Yeah.
And just scream.
Yeah, not much awareness. Yeah.
What is going on? It's all the red 40.
It's the red 40 and the yellow 13. It's probably not the right number.
And the COVID-19.
And the COVID-19, yeah. But yeah, I mean, growing up and being sad and seeing sadness as a bad, terrible emotion and trying to figure out, okay, how can I be happy as soon as possible? Because if I'm feeling sad, something's wrong.
Right.
And I think that's where we go wrong in navigating our emotions, because, sadness is an emotion that God created just like joy is. And if we don't allow ourselves to feel sadness, we won't be able to properly feel our other emotions as well. And so that's something I definitely struggle with in high school a lot, is like, I'm like, I don't want to feel sad. I'm just going to not feel sad and suppress all of these emotions. And then after a while I was like, I don't feel anything. I'm just numb 24/7, and I can't even cry when I want to cry and when I want to feel that relief. And the joys, weren't as joyful anymore because I wasn't allowing myself to feel the full spectrum of my emotions in the way that God created me. And like you said, God feels sadness too.
Jesus wept.
Yeah, Jesus wept. God feels the same things that we feel. And if we allow ourselves to just sit in that sadness for a little bit, and like you said, just process that with the Lord, think of all of the richness that could come from that in our relationship with Jesus, and how it causes us to go to him in our desperation instead of going to different things that are not healthy for us or aren't going to lead us closer to Jesus.
Right. Like, if I never went to God with my sorrow, I would never learn the character of God being my comforter. Like, I could learn other other characteristics of him, but I would never learn the comforter and the protector. Especially fear-based stuff is all protector. So it's just an opportunity every time I have these like big overwhelming emotions to learn different parts of him that I wouldn't have before. Yeah. So it's really a blessing. Yeah. Okay, so you did your half of a semester of Columbia State. Yes. And then what happened after that?
So after my half semester at Columbia State, I talked about being in my room, praying and submitting my life to the Lord. And like I said, nothing in that moment happened. But 2 weeks later, I got to go to my best friend at the time, his graduation from a thing called Narrowgate. It's this 8-month-long discipleship program for men. And during that time, you're basically asking the question, who am I and why am I here? What's my identity? Why did God put me on this earth? What's the point of all this? And so got to go to his graduation and just see all the transformation that happened in him through those 8 months that he spent at Narrowgate. Because it's 8 months and you have no phone that whole time. And you start out camping on a hill for a month, and then you spend about 4 or 5 months in community, living with other guys, doing Bible studies every day, doing work on the property. And I really saw a massive change in my friend at his graduation, so much so that I started to have these thoughts of like, maybe I need to do Narrowgate. Like maybe that's what I need to help me to deal with all these monumental issues in my life that I don't know how to face on my own, that the Lord is revealing to me. But as every sane person does, I was like, no, that can't be the Lord. God wouldn't ask me to give up 8 months of my life to go out into the woods and not have a phone and not see my friends or my family. But for the next like 2.5 weeks, the Lord just kept impressing that on my heart. Just go to Narrowgate, go to Narrowgate, go to Narrowgate. And I resisted and resisted and resisted until I couldn't resist anymore. And finally I relented and I was like, okay, Lord, I will, I'll apply and we'll see what happens. So I ended up applying and was accepted. And I went there in January of 2019.
Okay.
So I spent from January 2019 until September of that year at Narrowgate. And like I said, I was dealing with pretty heavy depression daily, lots of anxiety, addiction, shame. And that the Lord sending me to Narrowgate, I think it was like a saving grace for me. The first month I spent living on this hill on the property, camping out, and it was in January. So I was camping in January, and it's like in the 20s, 20s or 30s every night. And I had bought this really nice, like $200 0-degree sleeping bag before I went.
Okay.
And I was like, this is gonna be so nice. I'll have this sleeping bag at least, so I won't be cold at night. And then I get there and I show them my sleeping bag, and they're like, oh yeah, no, you can't use this. We're taking this away from you.
Why?
Because everything needed to be equal, because the other guys didn't have those sleeping bags. So they intentionally make you uncomfortable for the first month to try to break down those walls that you've built up. So they took away my sleeping bag. I was super mad about that. And they gave me the sleeping bag that like barely came up to my shoulders, had holes in it. And I was like, my toes were cold every night. I had to get like those hand warmers and like stuff them in my socks before I went to bed at night, or else my toes would go numb. But yeah, spent a month on the hill, and I cried myself to sleep for like the first 2 weeks I was there. And we were just, doing Bible studies every day, and the word started to come alive to me. When you have your phone every single day, and I was playing Xbox, and Fortnite was big. I guess it's still big now, but I was like obsessed with Fortnite back then. And the Bible just felt so dull to me. And then I go to Narrowgate, I remove all those distractions, and suddenly the word starts to come alive. And one of my leaders there encouraged me to read through the book, the Gospel of John, all the way through in one sitting.
Wow.
And I did that before I went to bed one night when I was up on the hill. And as I was reading the last chapter, I just started to tear up. And I was like, man, this is real. This is what's real. This is what I have been missing in my life. And I don't want anything else but to pursue God and to continue to do what I'm doing now, to grow closer with him and encounter him through his word. So through, those daily Bible studies, living in community, and God teaching me who I was, he slowly, over the course of those 8 months, began to free me of depression. And like I said, it wasn't something that happened overnight. I think that's kind of what I was expecting. Like, I wanted that quick fix. I wanted that instant healing. And God was like, you know what? I'm going to give you this healing, but I want you to seek me. And when you seek me, you will find me. And that's where you'll find this healing, is in intimacy with me, over and over and over, daily intimacy. So probably halfway through Narrowgate, I remember waking up one day and feeling excited for my day and just feeling hope and joy. Like, man, I'm actually excited for my life now. Like, this is a cool feeling. And, yeah, I'll never forget that feeling. And the Lord, just through, I think, teaching me who I am as a son, began to relieve me of that, that overwhelming anxiety that I felt and couldn't cope with. But to just be able to rest and breathe in the fact that I'm his son and he loves me, and I have a father who died for me. And if he died for me, think of all the other things that he would do for me, and the extents that he would go to love me and pursue me. So yeah, my time at Narrowgate was extremely impactful. And towards the end of Narrowgate, I really felt the Lord leading me to go into missions, which is something that I never really thought of before. I remember being a little kid one time, like laying in my bed and thinking, man, it would be cool to be a missionary one day. And then thinking like, no, that could never happen. Like that's for radical Christians. That's for like crazy Christians. But towards the end of Narrowgate, God began to impress that on my heart, to do ministry and to do missions. And so I had two friends who had gone to something called YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and they came back and they started something called Fireplace here in Nashville, and they were just really on fire for the Lord. And I was like, man, I want to have that fire. I want to have that passion for the Lord. Like I was just ready to go. I was, full of zeal, full of enthusiasm, and I was just ready to go anywhere and do anything for God. So I prayed about it. I had no idea where I was supposed to do YWAM. I knew a lot of people went to Hawaii because that was like the main base. But I'm like, man, I don't want to just go to Hawaii because it's Hawaii and because it's sun and beach and surfing. I really want the Lord to lead me. So I had like 3 different bases in mind that I was thinking of going to do my... First, you do a discipleship training school for 3 months, and then you spend another 3 months on outreach, applying everything that you've learned and actually living on mission in whatever country you're in. So I was praying about where to go, and it became so overwhelming because I'm sitting here on my computer at Narrowgate. Like the last month, you get your phone and computer back. So I had my computer and I'm researching, and I have like 2 weeks before that fall semester started. So I'm looking at this map of the globe with like thousands of different YWAM bases, like in maybe not thousands, hundreds of different YWAM bases in almost every country in the world. And it was so overwhelming. And I'm like, Lord, I don't want to make the wrong decision. I don't want to displease you and go to the wrong place. And in that moment, I just prayed and I'm like, Lord, I'm so overwhelmed right now. You just need to like make this clear to me because I can't choose. And so shut the laptop and stopped looking. And then 2 days later, I get a phone call from a family friend of mine who I hadn't talked to in months. So she had no idea that I was planning on doing YWAM, that I was planning on going into missions. We hadn't spoken in months. And so she calls me, and the first thing that she says is, she's like, Walker, are you going to Hawaii? And I was like, maybe, why? And she said, 2 nights ago, I had a dream that you're going to Hawaii. And it was just this really vivid dream. And I was just shocked in that moment because I don't think I'd ever had the Lord lead me in such a direct way before. Yeah. So when she said that, I said, well, maybe I am going to Hawaii actually, because this is something I've been praying about, and told her, what I've been thinking about. So I ended up applying for YWAM in Kona, Hawaii, and 5 days after I graduated from Narrowgate, I flew out to Hawaii and started my discipleship training school there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then, which outreach did you do? Like, where did you go for your outreach?
Yeah. So I ended up going to Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
If you don't know where that is, it's in Oceania, directly above Australia. For those who didn't do CC geography,
didn't draw the world.
A lot of people mistakenly think it's in Africa, which is
it kind of does sound like
it kind of makes sense. Yeah. So went to Papua New Guinea for my outreach. Very, very underdeveloped place, a predominantly Christian nation, but kind of intermingled with voodoo and different beliefs, very heavily Lutheran. So a lot of rules, a lot of heavy morality and legalism mixed in with Christianity, and then there's some sprinkle a little voodoo in on top,
and new agey.
That's what you've got. Not really new age, but like voodoo is in witch doctors. Like if your kid gets sick, take them to a witch doctor to heal them instead of praying for them or taking them to the actual doctor.
To a real doctor, yeah.
Yeah. But that was an incredibly fun outreach. Before going there, I had never done any public speaking. And, I was homeschooled growing up, and in CC, where our classes consisted of like 3 people. So when you're
Yeah.
doing your presentation, it's like your teacher and then your 2 classmates that you're presenting to.
Who don't care.
Who don't care. Yeah, they're probably not paying attention. So I was never forced to do any public speaking, and I was terrified of even the thought of it. And even speaking in a room full of people, I would get nervous and my face would get red and I would forget what I was going to say. So that's just not a way that I envision that God would ever use me. And it's something that I considered to be a weakness. But I decided to do something called Messengers Track with YWAM.
Okay.
Which during the first 3 months, 2 days a week, you have a track for 1 or 2 hours where Messengers Track was learning how to more effectively share the gospel, more effectively share your testimony, and to work on breaking off fear of man and learn how to do public speaking. And so I knew I was scared to do it, but I knew that's what God wanted me to do. So that's the track that I chose. And they would have us doing crazy things like standing on top of chairs and screaming and just like doing things that you would normally be embarrassed to do.
Right.
And then they would make us go out in the community and evangelize, which I had never done before. I'd never, I had been a Christian all, 19 years of my life at that point, and had never evangelized or like told a non-believer about my faith, which I never thought about until then. And then when I thought about it, I was like, that's actually kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But so the Lord really started to develop me in that way. And I still, I wouldn't say that it's, public speaking is a gift that I have even now, but going to Papua New Guinea was really cool because we got so many opportunities to preach the gospel and to share our testimonies in public. And we bought this little boom box with a microphone, and we would just go out into the market and set it up. And we would do these super goofy skits that we practiced just to like get people's attention.
Yeah.
So it was like this, we played this song and it was like this almost interpretive dance type thing. And that would get so many people's attention because in Papua New Guinea, there were like no white people anywhere. So when they would see a bunch of white people doing this awful dance in the middle of their town, they're like, okay, what's going on? I'm gonna go check this out. So we'd have like 500 people sometimes gather around us, and then we would share our testimony, share the gospel, and ask people if they wanted healing for anything. And that's something that really struck me, and it was the first time that I had like really witnessed powerful healing like in front of my eyes. Like beforehand, growing up, it's kind of like, oh, like you're sick, like I'll be praying for you, but
Right.
I never thought to like, oh, like your ankle's twisted, let me pray for you right now in the moment, let me lay hands on you. I had just never thought about that. No one ever
Yeah.
taught that in church growing up, or at least the church that I went to. And so that's something that I got to see before my eyes. Was like, wow, the Lord, he heals. Like this is the God of the Bible, and he still works healings today, and he still performs miracles today, and he can do that through me. Which is something that just blew my mind, learning that in the moment. So I got to preach the gospel, saw a lot of people come to the Lord, saw a lot of people healed of various things, and I just came alive while I was doing that, while I was on mission, getting to travel around the world and experience different cultures and see the way that other believers live across the globe was so impactful for me. And I would recommend to anybody who is, at all thinking about doing missions or anything like that to go try it.
Yeah.
Go try it for 6 months, go try it for a year and see what the Lord does. And he may lead you into some really, really crazy, awesome, fun experiences that you would never have if you never stepped out in faith.
Right. So then you come back and then you become a middle school director and you're working for a church.
Yeah.
Why that and not missions in a different country?
Yeah. So there were a few things in between there.
Okay.
YWAM was in 2019 and I finished in 2020. So COVID was hitting as soon as I was done with my DTS. So we got cut like a week short. I come home, everything shut down, and I came home and I was very like very zealous and full of enthusiasm, like I said. And so I ended up shutting myself in my room, and I was like, because I was thinking about staffing with YWAM.
Okay.
But I'm like, Lord, I need a sign. I need a fleece for you to tell me whether or not this is your will. And so I ended up locking myself in my room for 2 days. And I was like, God, I'm not coming out until you give me like a clear sign of whether or not I'm supposed to staff. And I didn't eat either. I'm like, I'm not eating food until you tell me. So I would leave my room just to like go to the bathroom or take a shower, and then I'll go back in my room. And then after 2 days, I'm like, man, God's not telling me anything. I don't think I can stay in here for any longer. So I ended up, I prayed, and I'm like, Lord, I really feel this on my heart and the desire to do this. And if you don't want me to do this, then make that clear to me. So I ended up making the decision to go, because I wasn't hearing anything from the Lord at that time. And so then I spent 6 months at home, worked at Lowe's and a furniture warehouse for a little bit. I was just saving up some money, hung out with friends, and then went back to staff at YWAM. So I spent almost 2 years staffing at YWAM.
Okay.
So I got to lead a team to Haiti, spent some time in San Francisco, and was just doing a lot of the same, discipling students, preaching the gospel, learning more about how to be a missionary. And I was dead set. You asked me like why I didn't choose missions. I did choose missions. I was dead set on going to the Middle East and being a long-term missionary in the Middle East. That's what was on my heart. That's what I had decided I was going to do, and that's where I felt the Lord was leading me. But towards the end of those 2 years, God very unexpectedly brought me out of YWAM. And it was very quick, very painful, something I did not expect. So I went from, this was beginning of 2022, I went from preparing to, I think I was preparing to move in about a year from then. So I would have probably gone like a year later. Maybe it would have been 2 years later, more practically, or more realistically. But was planning to move to Saudi Arabia with a team of people. And that's what I had told everyone that I was doing. And that's what I was set on. And then February 2022, God very quickly and unexpectedly brought me back home. And I was at home with no car, no job, no money, no college degree at 22. So I went from, spending 3 years in missions. That's what I chose instead of school, kind of like, I don't want to say like working my way up the ladder, but, I went from a student to becoming staff to joining this long-term team that was going to go to the Middle East. And I felt like I'd put so much effort into that. And then all of a sudden it was gone. And I didn't realize how much I put my identity in missions and in doing things for God instead of just being okay with being with God. And in the moment, that was one of the most painful things that happened to me, because all of my closest friends at the time were there. That was what I saw as my home. Those people were my home. And that's what I was going to do with my life. And I think in a lot of ways, ministry had become a crutch for me. It had become, another form of distraction. And that, I think a lot of people can realize that once they're in ministry for a little bit, and that's not the case. I'm not saying that's the case for everyone who's a missionary, not even, not even close. But that was my story, and that became the case for me. And so in the moment, it was so confusing, so painful. And I started to experience a lot of that depression again. And even, fell back into porn and different things that I thought that I had overcome. And I was just so confused. I was like, Lord, you've been leading me so clearly for the last 3 years. What happened? Now I'm back home. I feel like I'm back where I started 4 years ago. And I feel so lost and I feel so broken. But the Lord really met me in my brokenness, and he met me there. And he started to show me, like, Walker, it's not your holiness or your loveliness that gives you access to my love, but it's your brokenness and actually your unloveliness that gives you access to my love and that draws me near to you. Especially when you're aware of your brokenness. And like I said, I was using ministry as a crutch and a cover up to cover up my brokenness. And I had been so focused on my behavior and just faking it, fake it till I make it mentality in ministry that can easily be developed. And God knew, I didn't know, but God knew that he had to strip that away and bring me home. To lead me into more dependency on him and to strengthen my relationship with him in areas that I didn't know needed to be strengthened.
Yeah.
So if I had had my way, I would have, gone to the Middle East, and I'm sure it would have been great, and God would have used that if that's what he had chosen. And that's something it's still a desire that I have, and I've put that on the shelf, and I'm willing to go there at some point if God wants me to. But yeah, he definitely led me in a different direction. So it took a while for me to transition out of YWAM. It was a really difficult process, and it took a long time for me to just like feel okay.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of confusing emotions that went along with that. And a lot that God had to teach me and rework in my brain and the framework that I had of understanding my faith and understanding the way that he was leading me. So I ended up doing landscaping during that time. I didn't have a car for 2 months, and one of my best friends at the time drove me to work every day because we did landscaping together. And it was everything I needed in that time to be outside, to just like talk with God in nature while I was working with my hands. And that was something that in the moment I looked at it as this like curse that, man, I got, I'm not in the place that I want to be, and I'm doing this job that I don't want to do, that I see as like a lowly form of work. Like I think a lot of people can like look down on manual labor. And in that season, God used that to meet me and to connect with me. And I was able to just talk with him during the day and process my thoughts and process my emotions and be outside and have the sun on my skin. And it was everything I needed. And so God really worked on my heart during that season. And then I ended up getting a different job at a furniture warehouse. But I kind of came to a point where I was like, okay, I feel like I've kind of learned this lesson that you've taught me through this. Now what? And I was kind of waiting for the next thing. So a friend of mine and I, Andrew, we were at Chick-fil-A one day. This was the fall of 2022. And we just were feeling so discontent with our lives. We're like, man, there's got to be more to life than just like working every day and then coming home and, hanging out with friends. And we're like, okay, we're both young. We both are single. Neither of us were, pursuing a relationship at the time. And we have, lots of time, and we're not like invested in a career. So what if we just moved somewhere for a year? So at first it was just an idea, but then we were like, what if we actually did this though? So we ended up praying about it, and we're like, okay, we're just going to pick a state and move. And Andrew ended up, his brother-in-law had come back from a place called Refuge Foundation out in Wyoming. And it's a place that they host pastors and people in ministry. Okay. And they just give them space to rest and be themselves and fly fish and ride horses and shoot guns and just be men out in nature.
In the wilderness.
And he told me about it, and I was like, that sounds amazing. I've never fly fished in my life or really fished that much or ridden horses, but I'm so in. So we prayed about that. Felt a green light from the Lord, and we ended up signing up to work there. So we ended up moving out in the beginning of 2023.
Okay.
So I spent a year working out there, partly in Montana and then partly in Wyoming. Became a fly fishing guide, got to hang out with a lot of cool people, pastors and ministry leaders and business leaders, and it was so impactful.
Wow.
And it really helped me to take a lot of pressure off of myself because I felt like I was behind. I was 23 at the time, I felt like I was behind everyone else. I didn't have a college degree. I still didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I went there, and then I'm getting to talk with all these guys that are, 40, 50, 60. And they're like, you're so young. They're like, you're 23. Oh my gosh, you're so young. You have all the time in the world to figure it out.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, I still don't know what I'm doing. and I'm 50 and I have a family or whatever. And so that just alleviated a lot of that pressure and a lot of that anxiety that I was feeling. And also the Lord really put some things on my heart, just next steps for me while I was there. And it was an amazing experience just getting to be out in nature. So being out in refuge in Wyoming is actually how I got connected to Grace Chapel, which is what I'm doing now. So Dylan Dawkins, the student pastor at Grace Chapel.
Okay.
Last September, a little over a year ago, he came out on a trip, and he was in a season where he was looking for a new person to lead the middle school and, wasn't able to find anyone. And he had texted, he also did Narrowgate.
Okay.
And so he texted the founder of Narrowgate, and he asked them, he's like, hey, do you know of anyone that would be good to be the middle school leader at Grace Chapel? And so they texted him back like 3 people's names and then pictures of them. And then he goes out to Refuge the next week, and he ends up meeting me. And we had never met before, but we both did Narrowgate. So we really connected, and we went out on a horseback ride. We're riding through the mountains. And he asked me my story. So I'm telling him my story. I'm telling him about, ministry and my desire to maybe be in ministry in the future again. And he was like, what if you came and worked at Grace Chapel, and we could just create a role for you, and you could decide for 6 months if you like this or not? Cause I was telling him, I'm like, man, I don't really know if youth ministry is right for me. I don't know if I have what it takes to be a middle school leader. And so he's like, you can just do like a 6-month trial run. We'll create a role for you where you can kind of shadow and just figure it out.
Wow.
Which was super cool. So I really wanted to take that opportunity. And I moved back about a year ago, last November, and had an interview with him. And it took a couple of months to get everything figured out. So I ended up getting hired on in January and worked for about that 6 months turned into like 4 months. So it was they kind of like crunched the time for me to figure out if that's what I wanted to do. But I fell in love with it. At first, I definitely had some second thoughts.
Yeah.
We had a middle school retreat. That was like a 2-night retreat, 4-hour bus ride, and that turned into an 8-hour bus ride. So I'm sitting with all these students on a bus that I don't know, and that they don't respect me or listen to me, and they're being super loud the whole time. And I'm just like, I don't know if I knew what I was getting myself into. Like, this is insane. This is not what I signed up for. But after the retreat, after just building relationship with them and getting to know them, and kind of gaining their respect, it was so cool to see the ways that they responded to me after that. And like showing up at church the next week and having kids run up to me and knowing my name and being excited to see me. And I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. Like maybe I should press into this. And it's really taught me that, kids especially, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And they know how much you care when you show up in their lives when you don't have to. And through, this past year, just showing up in their lives, I've just seen the ways that they've responded to the gospel, and that they've responded to me, and the ways that they have opened up to each other and opened up to the Lord. And yeah, it's been incredible. It's definitely been an up and down journey. Ministry is not easy. Ministry is definitely something that it refines you. And if the Lord hasn't called you to it, I don't believe you'll last very long in it.
Yeah.
Because it's very refining. So.
That's wild. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Do you plan to stay doing this for a while?
Yeah, I think so. I think at first I kind of viewed it as like a stepping stone into moving into something else. So last year, being at Refuge, I was praying about going back to school and getting my degree in counseling. And that's something that I believe last year God really gave me the confidence for. and put that on my heart of like, yes, if you do this, I'm going to bless you in this. And so I saw that as my next step. And then this opportunity at Grace Chapel came up, and I'm like, okay, I think this would be a good like stepping stone into counseling. And I think after being in this position for 6 months, I am seeing it less of a stepping stone and more of like a lifelong calling. So I don't know that I'll be, like I say that not to say that I will be in middle school ministry or youth ministry for the rest of my life. Counseling is still something that I want to pursue, but I could really see that being something that's like intertwined. That
like
I could,
Jimmy Harris.
yeah, like Jimmy. Yeah, Jimmy is a pastor and he's also a counselor. So I think that's something that I would love to do, because I believe that God's given me a pastoral heart, and I really want to love these kids and pour into them. Because I just remember feeling so alone at that age, and to have somebody that's walking with you is such a game changer. So that's something I'm still figuring out. I want to go back to school, and I'm figuring out the practicals behind that, and if that's something that I can do while I'm working at Grace Chapel.
Like time-wise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine having a counseling degree would be super helpful.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
In a pastoral role.
Yeah.
Even with like kids.
Yeah. I mean, you're definitely as a youth leader, even our youth leaders that are just volunteers, they're doing so much counseling.
Yeah.
Every week with the students, whether it be in a small group setting, that's like group counseling, it's like group therapy.
Yeah.
Or in a one-on-one setting, it's all basically therapy.
It's all basically therapy, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing so much of your story.
Yeah.
I think it'll impact people a lot.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I think going into this, I was thinking more about like myself, and I was thinking about the ways that people would view me. Just like my first time being on a podcast, I'm like, oh, how are people gonna, if I say this, how are people gonna think of me? If I say that, how are people gonna perceive me? Especially people that don't know me on a personal level. And then God kind of just hit me, and he's like, hey, this isn't about you.
Yeah.
You aren't going on this podcast for you and to glorify your own name and to make Walker Henderson known to however many people listen to this. And so I think that kind of helped to just, okay, Lord, whatever you want me to say, I'll say, and it's for your glory. And even if it makes me look bad to some people, but it glorifies God, like that's worth it.
Right.
So,
and way less pressure.
Yeah, so much less pressure.
Yeah.
Pressure's not on us. So, I'm definitely thankful for this opportunity, and it's been a lot of fun.
Good. I'm excited for people to listen to it.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm so excited for everything that God is doing through you.
Yeah.
And the new leadership at Grace Chapel, it's just been I've been so thankful to hear only good things since new leadership.
Yeah.
That's been such a huge blessing. Especially like the church that I, called my home church for so long. I love that.
Yeah.
And I respect the leaders a lot. So it's a really great place.
Yeah. It's definitely, I will definitely stand behind the people at Grace Chapel, and not just because I work there. So yeah, it's something that for a few months I was skeptical about, and I was committed to discovering, okay, is this a healthy place? Is this a safe place? Because I've heard so many things.
Right.
And I have experienced nothing but love and acceptance and real people who are there, loving all the people in the congregation and serving them. So I think God has really alleviated me of all my skepticism now, and I would really stand behind everyone there.
Yeah. Is there a way that people can be praying for you?
Yeah, I think I think in youth ministry, it can become a grind. It can just become like a weekly, okay, got to write my sermon, got to pump this out. And it's easy to start to go through the motions, and it's easy to lose your creativity and your passion. It's easy for it to just become a job in some ways. And I never want it to become a job. I never want my motivation to be the paycheck. Like, obviously, there are going to be times when I don't want to go to work and I know, like, hey, this is my livelihood. But yeah, I want it to always be about the students, the kids, and impacting them. And I guess I would just ask that people would pray for continued passion and vision for what I'm doing, and for God to help me to not work from my own strength, not to work from my own intellect, but to work from the strength that he provides.
Yeah.
And to pray that I will be with Jesus more, because that's how, Acts 4:13 says that they saw the boldness of Peter and John and were amazed, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was not that they, and it says that they were uneducated and common men. And it's not that they had gone to seminary, that they had all this education, that they had all this intellect. They were just common guys, but they had that boldness, and they were able to do what they were doing because they had been with Jesus.
Yeah.
So just prayers that I will continue to be with Jesus, and that will always be the first thing for me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the description too.
Yeah.
Are your sermons recorded and on Grace Chapel's website? They're not?
No, mine are not. Mm-mm.
Cool. Well, then if you want to hear more of Walker, I guess you have to go sit in middle school.
Gotta go sit in middle. Gotta get a background check and go sit in middle
Yes.
school. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Awesome.
We're going to say 3, 2, 1, bye, okay?
All right. Let's do it.
3, 2, 1,
2, 1. Oh,
bye.
Bye.
I thought we were going to say it at the same speed that I already said it.